So welcome to week 3 of our study of Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. For those of you who are not familiar with Brene Brown or her work, she is a professor at the University of Houston and has done years and years of research on people and how they are resilient or not resilient to shame, to things happening in their lives and moving through them and coming out on the other side. She's done all kinds of work on vulnerability, on courage, and on empathy. She's the author of 5 books and one of the top 5 most viewed TED Talks in the world, The Gifts of the Power of Vulnerability. And on Netflix, she has a special called The Call to Courage. And if you are interested in this work and interested in what you hear today, I invite you to dig a little deeper on your own time by looking at those TED Talks that she has, as well as that Netflix special. In the course of her research, she has come up with 10 different guideposts that she has identified as consistencies, consistent traits in people that she identifies as wholehearted, as people who feel a deep sense of love and belonging, and who seem to navigate through life's challenges in a way that allows them to come out on the other side of the challenge, not destroyed. And in her course of trying to understand how some people make it through and seem sometimes even to thrive after a challenge, and others will go through a similar challenge and absolutely fall apart. She has come up with these 10 different guideposts. And the first week, we looked at one of the guideposts, and that was to let go of our fear of the dark and of scarcity, and to cultivate the trait and habit of gratitude and joy. The idea here was to break the cycle of scarcity thinking that we all have. That scarcity that says, I'm not going to enjoy this completely because it's not going to last forever. That scarcity of, I don't deserve this, so I'm not going to take it and live into it. And what her findings were, is people who were wholehearted made an intentional habit of practicing gratitude constantly. They either write letters, or they keep a gratitude journal, or they do one of several other practices. They practice gratitude. And we came up with the idea here of the joy jar. And that is, every time you find something or experience something that you want to remember as being something to be grateful for, that you put a little note in this joy jar. Because isn't it true that we have plenty to be grateful for, and sometimes we forget in the moment of seeing something that's not quite what we want it to be. So I hope you guys are doing things with these joy jars. I switched to a bigger one, actually. Because what I found is, rather than writing it on a sticky note, like I've got event tickets. I went to a play in White Rock a couple of weeks ago. I'm just dropping that all in there. It's like, this is the stuff that makes my life feel abundant. So If you don't have one, we have a few left. Please feel free to grab one. Then last week, we looked at the notion of letting go of what people think and instead encouraging ourselves to be authentic. And what does authentic look like? The Merriam-Webster dictionary says to be true to one's own personality, to one's own spirit or character. It is really representing one's true nature. And we spoke about how difficult it can be to be authentic at times. Because when you are authentic, sometimes that might feel like hurting somebody else's feelings. Or it might feel like you're going against the crowd, and we all want to be part of the crowd. We are wired for connection. And so we came up with some strategies about how to remain authentic and remain connected. And this idea of having two hula hoops, where the other and we can be separate and connected. The hula hoop's not one in front of the other and we lose ourselves, but separate and still connected. Think of magic rings. And part of the challenge with being authentic is, how do you do that in a way that doesn't sound aggressive? How do you separate aggression from assertion? They have two very different energies. And so I was asked last week after the service to put up on the slide some of the words that we used as examples of how one can be assertive without losing connection. And the most powerful way to do it, in my opinion, is to say, I want to feel connected with you, and I'm not comfortable with this. This is not something I'm interested in, or whatever that message might be. So on the slide you'll see, I know you're trying to be helpful, but this isn't helpful right now. I care about you, I want to remain connected with you, and I'm not that interested in doing this. From there, you can have a conversation, right? What can we do that we can both agree on? Or maybe it becomes a conversation of, well, let's do this today, and let's do something you want next time, and so on. I would like to go to this place, this experience. How many of us are like, oh, whatever you want, dear. And what that leads to, sometimes, is a sense of resentment. And so to get ourselves completely out of that space and stand in our true sacred space and say, yeah, this is what I want, and I deserve it, because guess what? I deserve it. That's it. I exist. I deserve it. To be able to say, here's what I am willing to do. To be able to say, here's what I'm not willing to accept. No, thank you. I'm not comfortable with that. I prefer not to. So those were 2 out of the 10. Today, we look at a third. All the perfectionists in the house just left. The challenge here, and what Brene Brown found in her research, is that people who are wholehearted have let go of the need to be perfect. And instead, what they do is practice the self-compassion. This recognition that they aren't going to do everything perfectly all the time, and that's okay. So what does perfection look like? Perfectionist, according to the dictionary, is a person who refuses to accept any standard short of perfection. Well, that's helpful, isn't it? What does that mean? Actually, it's very instructive, because perfection is a subjective thing. And what's perfection for me might not be perfection for Purdy. And it might not be perfection for Sharon. And what's perfection for Hilda may not be perfection for me. And so perfection is this nefarious, squishy thing that no one can really identify because it isn't really something that's real. And what Brene Brown found is that people are so much kinder to themselves, and when they're kinder to themselves, they can move forward. So how do you define and differentiate between perfection and self-improvement? I like to think that I'm interested in self-improvement, but I'd also like to think that I'm not a perfectionist. How do we put that together? This is how she puts it. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, we look perfect, we act perfect, we will minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. Perfection is a shield. Who ever thought of perfection that way? I always thought of perfectionism as being the striving to do something perfectly. And what Brene Brown is suggesting in her research and in her work is that our attachment to perfectionism is a result of an underlying feeling of not good enoughness. That shifted something for me when I started to reflect on that. So of course I had to look a little deeper to try and understand what that means, and how does perfectionism differ from that self-improvement. Self-improvement, you strive to do your best. It is healthy. We're looking for healthy achievement and growth. Self-improvement is asking myself, how can I improve? It is self-focused. How can I do this? Because I want to do the best possible job I can, because I take pride in what I do. Perfectionism, at its root, is a practice to earn somebody else's approval. And so it is, the goal of it is other-focused. It's what will they think? And as I said earlier, perception plays a big role in perfection. Say that 3 times quickly. So perfectionism is about perception. We want to be perceived as perfect. That's the difference. Ooh, and the music agreed with me. So, how is it that we become perfectionists? Why is it that we need this? Well, what happens is we fall into a vicious cycle. We do something, we find and experience that it wasn't done quite as well as we want, or somebody says something and it cuts us to the quick, and we feel shame, or we feel not good enough, or we feel inadequate in some way. And then we believe that the reason that we're feeling this way is because we weren't perfect enough. So what do? We go and try harder for the unattainable goal of perfection. What Brene Brown says, we often believe it's because we weren't perfect enough. So rather than questioning the faulty logic of perfectionism, we become even more entrenched in our quest to live, look, and do everything just right. Does anybody identify with that? And then we blame ourselves for not being good enough. And over time, what happens is that we equate good enough with failure. So on this, success on one side and failure on the other, good enough, which one would think would be exactly what it says, ends up being inadequate. And so our need to please, to perform, to be perfect keeps going round and around. And it comes for all of us from a time when we were little children, right? When we were children, we were rewarded when we got A's. If we got 90% on a test, what was the first thing your mother said? What did you do wrong? Where did the other 10% go? Where's perfection? In the school that I went to in South Africa, we used to have, it's a parochial school system. I don't think it's like that so much anymore. But we used to have class placements. So the person who was first out of 27 in the class, that was written right on the report card. And in one of my classes, the person who was first had to sit beside the person who was second, and the third had to sit beside the person who was fourth, and fifth, and sixth. Hilda used to be a school teacher. She recognizes this. Perfection was the goal, and anything less than that was seen as not good enough. And whether we identify as perfectionists or not, we all can identify with that feeling of, well, wasn't quite perfect. What Brene Brown says is we all actually have perfectionist tendencies. Some just are more than others. And I appreciate that because I do see the truth in that for me. So what are the consequences of this perfectionism? This is a quote from her book, Daring Greatly. I remind myself, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. A 20-minute walk that I do is better than the 4-mile run that I don't do. The imperfect book that gets published is better than the perfect book that never leaves my computer. The dinner party of takeout Chinese food is better than the elegant dinner party that I never host. One of the side effects of perfectionism is paralysis. It's a paralysis of life. And think about it. How many of us here in this room have dreamt that one day we will write a book, or draw a beautiful painting, or sing an aria, and have prevented ourselves from doing those things because we know we can't do it perfectly? How much joy have we denied ourselves because we aren't good enough, we don't do it well enough? Paralysis. The other consequence that I consider to be most damaging is when we have this need for perfection, so do all the people around us become affected by that need. And often what that does is affect the relationships we have with people. Because all of a sudden, our not enoughness becomes translated or affects into their not enoughness. They aren't good enough. They don't sing well enough. They aren't thin enough, aren't fat enough, aren't tall enough, short enough, intelligent enough, athletic enough. And that can really affect all of our relationships. And so we have this realization that perfectionism affects our relationship with ourselves and all of the relationships that we have around us, most particularly the relationships of the people who live under the same roof as we do. Okay, so now that I've depressed everybody with all this stuff and why it's so bad, what can we do about it? What are the antidotes? What was that? Somebody said something smart. What did you say, Sam?
It's hopeless.
It's hopeless. Everybody just go home right now. What happens? What happens? We end up wanting to remember to be compassionate. There's a story told in the book of John where Jesus is walking and these group of men have a woman who has been accused of adultery. And I can imagine this picture in my head of this mob of men and this one lone woman. And they want to try and catch Jesus out because that's what the context of the story is. And they say to him, what should happen to her? The Mosaic Law, our existing Mosaic Hebrew law, demands that she be stoned. And he kneels down and starts writing, and we don't know what he wrote. But they keep on at him. What should we do with her? And finally he gets up and he says, let he who is among you let me say it right because I'm going to mess it up. Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And then he went back down and continued to write on the ground. And after a time he looked up and everyone had left, except for the woman. If it had been me, I'd have booked my head right out there. However, for some reason this woman felt compelled to stay and talk to Jesus. And I wonder about the wisdom of that, because aren't we sometimes in our own self-talk ready to throw the stones at ourselves, let alone at the people out there who we know and love? We accuse ourselves of not being good enough, of breaking the perfection law, as if we have like a perfection police in our head. And then we want to throw stones at it. Oh, you dummy. Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. How stupid. Do we not say these things to ourselves? What if instead we came with that same recognition that we all make mistakes? What if we recognize that at times we've done things perfectly well and we can tell those little voices in our minds that that is so? What if instead of throwing the stone, we can recognize that mistakes are part of the human experience and need not be cast away or thrown with stones. Just a thought.
So what was on the ground?
Walt. There was dirt on the ground and a stick, and he was probably writing some of this. Let's go with that picture. We don't know. But what we do know is that self-compassion leads to compassion for others. And so if we want to break the spell of perfectionism, let us not cast stones at ourselves. Instead, what if we pretended that that person who is feeling shame within us was a small child who had made a mistake? What would we do? What would you do if it was your best friend who came to you and said, you know, I sang this solo and it was great, except I didn't hit this note and I feel so embarrassed it wasn't perfect? What would you say to that person? With any luck, it would be something like, I'm so sorry that you're feeling sad. That must feel awful. And I want you to know that it was wonderful. So we don't pretend that it doesn't happen. We don't say you shouldn't feel that way, because should, anytime you use that word, it's a clue that something's out of whack. Name that feeling and then put it into context. Because the context is 99% of the solo was probably beautiful. And we focus on the one that isn't. In perspective, does it matter? No. However, it takes courage. It takes courage to get to the point of looking at places where we're feeling that shame, where we're feeling that angst because something isn't perfect. To look at it and go, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable. What is it that is causing this reaction for me? And is it true? And does it serve me? And is there a different way that I can speak to myself about this lack of perfection? So, courage for the self-inquiry. Realize that we will always experience shame. Let's pretend that that's not gonna, let's not pretend that that's not true. It's part of our humanness. Our goal isn't to pretend that shame doesn't exist. It's to work with it and transform it. And free ourselves from fog, fear, obligation, and guilt of shame. And we do that by talking to ourselves kindly. And when we talk to ourselves kindly, we talk to everyone else more kindly. So instead of I should have done this better. Trust me, up here, I think that often. On a Sunday, I'll go and go, oh man, I should have said this. And to remember to say, relax. You're okay, you did okay. gives other people permission to try something and fail. It's okay. From what will they think to I want this for me. To move from it's not perfect to it's the best I can do right now and I'm okay with that. Then when a child or a friend runs up to you and says, oh, I blew it. My reaction was not perfect. I would have liked to be the kind, loving spouse, but instead I was a bag. Never happens. To have another person or yourself go, okay, it's okay. How much more loving our relationships would be if we did that for ourselves. So I leave you with this thought. Take it easy. Just take it easy. You know the song by the Eagles? Take it easy. Don't let the sound of your own wheels drive you crazy. There's such wisdom in lyrics. Don't let the sound of your own wheels drive you crazy. Take it easy. Yesterday, I had this battle with perfectionism because it was a beautiful sunny day and I could have been out in the afternoon, and I decided no, I was going to work on my talk. So I started working on my talk, but I was also watching the figure skating, and somewhere about 15 minutes into the whole procedure I started feeling really tired. And I fell asleep for 3 hours. And the perfectionist part in me was like, well, what is this? And then the other part of me, the kind part, was, oh, you must have really enjoyed that sleep, and now you are ready and refreshed to work. All of it is choice and habit and powerful because it's catchy. Remember, you are worth the kindness that you express to yourself. Say the words that you would say to your best friend or to someone you respect or admire. Ask yourself the next time you're in that place of black and white thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done this, or this wasn't perfect, and what are they going to think? Ask yourself, what's the worst that will happen? Will it matter in a month, a year, 5 years? What's more important, the relationship or the thing? The relationship with self or with others, or the thing? Write a letter to yourself. Get it all out. These are ideas that can help you to remember that you're amazing just the way you are. And that good enough right now is good enough. Let's take us into a time of quiet. So we reflect on the idea that perfection does not need to be our goal. That there is room for us right where we are, right as we are. I draw from today's daily word. As I look to the east on a clear morning, I see the sky beginning to grow lighter about an hour before sunrise. The changes in color are nearly imperceptible at first. Birds begin their morning songs as the sky grows brighter. Then, as golden rays of light proclaim the rising sun, I hear these words from the creation story of Genesis. Let there be light. And there is light. The light of spiritual understanding dawns within my own consciousness in much the same way. The darkness of ignorance begins to lighten. Insights emerge, dimly at first, and then more vividly. Finally, understanding pours forth like the radiant morning sun. And there is light. Jesus reminded us that we are the light of the world. We need prove nothing. We need only to choose differently, to embrace ourselves in the warm hug of forgiveness and love. The warm hug of, you can do this. The warm hug of, take it easy. You are amazing, just as you are. You are amazing, just as you are.
You will do amazing things with the choice each new day brings. And with every step you take, bless the progress that you make. The reason you live is found in every gift you give. Love your life, love your dreams. You will do amazing things. close your eyes and take a breath and smile. Amazing, amazing. You will do amazing things. Amazing, amazing. You will do